No, that's not a problem. Here it is.
Yes, I did a American Band there years and years ago. It's the first time we ever came across each other.
Well, because he's a very good friend of mine. I was a disc jockey in Boston, and we did a movie together, a picture called Jamboree a number of years ago,
Oh, yeah.
which was a disaster. But he is so well organized, and you seem to, I see you doing a tennis tournament, doing a show,
Yeah.
you continue records. Have you always been organized like this?
Well, I'm kind of organized. I mean, I am organized by other people. I tell people what I want to do, and basically other people do it for me, and we get it all set together. I think you just have to have in your mind what you want to do in life, and then you go ahead and do it. Obviously, you also have to have room to do anything that might be personal. Tennis, in point of fact, is just a great therapeutic, enjoyable sport for me. So, I mean, I can fit that in any time.
What about doing this show? Has this wreaked havoc with the rest of your, with the rest of the things you do in your life?
Well, no, not really. It's wreaked a little havoc on my tennis because I've suddenly become accessible in London. Whereas when you're on tour, you're away from home and you're away from all the pressures of the local pressures go, and you find that you're doing the gig every night at 7:30, so you know all day long you can play tennis until a certain time. On occasions there are press conferences, but you know ahead of time where they are. Whereas being in town here, what's happened is that because I'm accessible, I'm in London for a whole year, there have been multiple offers of things to do that I've wanted to do and done them, but it means that I've had to give up the day to do them. So it hasn't been quite what I planned, although from now on I'm hoping it'll slow down a little and I'll be able to get some social life in during the day.
Let me go back in time. What was skiffle? You know, I keep hearing skiffle. What was it? Where did it come from?
Well, skiffle was just before rock and roll hit here, really. It was the sort of first of the homemade musics, and it was very, very basic. It was that kind of folk music, really. And we had big stars like Lonnie Donegan, who made monstrous hit records.
Well, what kind of music was it? Was it offshoot of the blues? Or?
No, well, yeah, kind of bluesy, but it was like British blues. It was I find it very hard to describe it, never having been a purveyor of skiffle music. I'm not really liking it that much, to be honest with you.
I thought you had played some skiffle.
No, I joined a skiffle band just so I could sing. I just wanted to sing with anybody, and they had a band going. But we got kind of kicked out because the drummer and I were too rock and roll for them. And we were trying to move the music around to what we wanted.
Because you never made skiffle kind of records.
No, not at all. No, not at all. I'd never have done so either. It was a homemade music. Is the best way to describe it. I mean, the main thing about skiffle was if you had a skiffle group, you had a couple of guys playing guitar, somebody playing what they call a washboard. You know those old-fashioned things that you used to do your washing on with a kind of grated piece of metal that you rubbed your material on, or so. Well, you wore thimbles on your fingers and you did a sort of.
Yeah.
And that was your rhythm. And the bass was interesting. They used to have tea-chest basses, where you got a great big chest, wooden chest. I mean, an old tea chest would have been was perfect, with a broom handle that you stuck into one corner, and a piece of string that went down from the top of the broom handle to another part of the disc of the chest. You then, by pulling the handle away, tightened it or loosened it, and you made the do 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 do. So they were not real notes as such, but thumps.
It was English born, huh? It was born in this country?
It seems to me that skiffle was born here.
It's maybe a kickoff of bluegrass or some things like that, but not the rhythm patterns, anyhow.
No, I mean, maybe bluegrass is the nearest, but even then I would have thought that bluegrass was funky compared with skiffle. Lonnie Donegan gave it a bit of zap when he did his thing with it, because he kind of did things that were more American orientated than the pure skiffle, I suppose.
In '59, when you started making some hit records here, we in the States were not that conscious of whatever was happening. What was the state of the pop music business pre-62, 63?
Well, it was all... I mean, when I first started getting interested, of course, I mean, Elvis had started. Elvis was about 4 years older than me, I guess. Something like that. And his career had got started, I remember, I mean, I was 15 singing his song, so he must have started in 55, yeah. So, it was all copying American music, because it was so exciting. And for me today, rock and roll is still, America is still the fatherland of rock and roll. I don't think that America has control over rock and roll. Nobody has. It belongs to the world now, but America gave it to the world. And therefore holds pride of place, I think. That's why I still want desperately to have something happen for me in the States, because I seem to have cracked it everywhere except the place where it started, and it irks me. But at the time when, well, pre-62, pre-Beatles, everything certainly when I started, was copying and covering American records. Everything was American here, or else occasionally a British artist would break away, but only by covering an American song. And that didn't really appeal to me too much, even though my first record started off as being a cover of a Bobby Helms song called Schoolboy Crush, which Norrie Paramore found. But I just happened to have a guitarist who wrote a song called Move It on the bus going into town to see Norrie Paramore for our first audition. And Norrie said, great, we'll do that as well, and therefore we've got an A and a B side. And my luck, and this is where luck comes in, Jack Good, the guy who produced Shindig in the States, well, his first big TV show was here, in fact, with a show called Oh Boy. And he heard the record, the B-side. And in fact, he said, if Cliff Richard appears on my show, it's to sing the B-side. Well, the record company went ape, and it was wonderful. They turned all the publicity around and changed it from the Bobby Helm cover to the original song Move It. So I started my career. The record went to number 2 in Britain and was a hit around the world other than in America. Although it got played there, it wasn't a big hit. And I made it on an original song, which set me off. It set a pattern for me. Otherwise, I could have ended up being just like everybody else, hoping to suck America dry of its talent. And whereas it caused me to create my own thing.
You almost never had a downtime. You came out of the box with hit records, and you've always had it since.
No, I always joke and say I started at the top and then it was a slow slide down.
Did you really think it was that easy?
No, it was just, it's funny when you're making a record, particularly your first record, you can't do anything but think that it might be a hit, but most of the time you're hoping it'll be a hit. When it hits, it's almost as though you expected it, funnily enough. I can remember the feeling thinking, oh, well, yeah, of course it's a hit. Because once you hear it in context, once you hear it played with other records, you suddenly see, yeah, of course, now I see why it was a hit. But before that, you've just got your fingers crossed and you're hoping like mad. And it's a great booster to have something like that happen. And it works the same way. Even after that now, you still can't guarantee anything. I mean, it's wonderful, our industry, that you cannot latch onto anything. If you latch onto something, it won't last.
Peter Asher was a good friend of mine.
It becomes totally the acceptable way.
It's still a shock to him. Every time a record doesn't make it. Wait a minute.
Yeah, why doesn't this happen?
It used to be that way. Why? Paul McCartney has a theory about you're not making it in the States.
Well, tell me.
He says they were arrogant in that they would not go to the States until something had happened. And they used to talk to you or to somebody else who came back and said, yes, we had a good time, but you were playing second and third and
yes, we did.
On the bill.
But remember, we went there before there was a British scene. You see, yes. The Beatles came in on the backs of the rest of us.
Yeah.
I mean, when Elvis first started in 55, America had Elvis. The rest of the world had to take Elvis. And they loved him everywhere. The Shadows and I were the first band and singer, and we represented the rest of the world. It was the rest of the world versus America. So when the Beatles came in, they came in on the back of what we had done in the rest of the world. And of course it was about time that England then was to take off and be recognized anyhow. Because when I started, the solo singers that I was competing with in the States was Elvis, of course, Ricky Nelson, Bobby Rydell, Frankie Avalon, Fabian, you name it. So for another, the good-looking pop star that comes across here, it was just another pop star coming across.
You think you should have made records in the States? Do you think you?
No, I don't think. I think they're right in one way. I always said that after that first trip, where we had a resounding success live, but we never saw the record company. It took years. You see, the Beatles also must remember, and Paul must remember too, that when they came through, the business had become a business. There was machinery. We didn't have machinery. There was only one TV show, that was Oh Boy. There was no machinery, you just made it or you didn't make it, and that was it. When the Beatles came in, there was money and machinery because the industry had suddenly realized, wait a minute, here it is. Because after me, there came a whole host of other British acts that were really good. But it led to what was inevitably going to be, and here we get it again, you don't think of it as being, I don't think of myself as being historically part of British music until it's gone by. Then you think, wait a minute, I will never ever be able to be forgotten. I am, whether people like me or not, I am part of British rock and roll because my band and I began it. Hey, there was nobody before us here. Nobody. What did we base ourselves on? Only Elvis. There was nothing European, nothing at all. So everything we did was brand new. So when the Beatles came in, they had the whole machinery going. But I will agree with Paul one way. Even after that first trip, I thought, I don't want to go there until I've had a hit record. I don't want to. Why not wait for the record? But I kept being told by record companies, if you come here and live here,
then you'll have
we'll make you a star.
Yeah.
And I reckoned that was the wrong way around, so I never went to live there. But of course I tried to progress my career as best I could, which meant going whenever I could to do all the TV promotions. And when I did, I had single hits. And here's where I blame the record company again. And I believe they've now accepted the blame. They said to me, give us the singles, we'll give you the album. And that's the way it works in the States. You see the single charts, and you'll find that with every single there is a corresponding album either coming up or going down, having been up. I had I'm No Hero. We had 3 top 30 hits from the same album. The album did not break the 100. Now you tell me why. That is an impossibility. I should be in the Guinness Book of Records. It has never, I don't think there's ever been an artist who's had 3 single hits from the one album and the album didn't break.
Was that Epic Records?
No, it was EMI America.
Oh, EMI.
And the album was called I'm No Hero. And the singles were Carrie, Dreaming. No, it was Dreaming, A Little in Love, and Give a Little Bit More.
Yes, I remember all 3 of those songs.
3, but the album didn't break.
We would-
So I'm dogged by some kind of,
Yeah.
I don't like calling it bad luck, but certainly unfortunate
Didn't get good
situations.
luck.
Not on that, no. So it still remains a thing that I have to chase. But what I don't intend to do is chase it now. I think there's a certain amount of dignity involved, and I can't go, bowing my knee to every DJ that I meet. They've either got to like my records or forget it. And I make the records as best I can. They work in the rest of the world. I think Americans have got to ask themselves the question, the DJs anyway, why don't we play Cliff Richard records? Everybody else does. I mean, I share the charts with the Beatles and David Bowie everywhere in the world.
Did you feel threatened at all? Here you were established, and along came these guys out of Liverpool. Did you feel threatened by the scene that all started coming along?
No, because it seemed very much part of it, really. We were on a big high. They started 5 years after us, remember? They started in '63.
I know that, yeah.
So we were on a real high. In fact, the Beatles left the country. We read an article once where John Lennon took his glasses off because my guitarist used to wear glasses. They left the country because we kind of had it sewn up. There wasn't anything for the Beatles here. They went away. But at that time, they weren't really the Beatles as we know them. I mean, I've heard some early recordings, and they were diabolical. The tuning was duff, and the singing wasn't good, and there was no original material. It was still singing, "You make me dizzy, Miss Lizzie," and American stuff, which is what we'd gone through, but started to write our own. They went to Germany, and somehow the magic got into them. Somehow or another, they became McCartney and Lennon, and became the Beatles. Because I mean, there's no doubt that what they did was take pop music, not only from Britain's point of view, but from the world's point of view, into another whole realm. And it had to happen, and someone had to do it, and they did it. It couldn't have been us. We started too early. We were pioneers, and they're the ones that come after the pioneers and build on the foundations and just take it soaring away. And of course, the thing about it is that I've enjoyed even more success in latter years than I did in those days. I sell many more records now than I did in the 60s, and even in the 70s.
You were making records...
But to come back to the threatening business, I didn't feel threatened because nothing changed for us. The only thing that changed was that there was now more press about a group called the Beatles than any other band alive on Earth. But when we did concerts, we sold out. When we made records, they were in the top 20. So nothing changed for my band and I, other than there was this other band that just went zooming off into the ether. So there was no threat in that respect.
Along came a whole bunch of other things, the Who and the Stones, and certainly playing music that wasn't anything like Cliff Richard's.
Oh, no, that's right.
Did you feel you missing anything? Because you kind of went on your parallel course.
No, I've been a pop rock fan from as far back as I can remember. Whatever that takes, that's what I do. I don't sing blues. I mean, I sing songs that have a blues feel sometimes, but they're not really blues because it's bent into being pop rock. Mick Jagger and the Stones were heavily into blues. I mean, I've never been into anything but Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, Ricky Nelson, Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers, and a few others that I've probably forgotten to mention. And I've remained true to that. I sometimes get really annoyed when people who start off with a rock career, because it seems to me that rock and roll has been a great entrance into our industry. But quite often I feel that there's traitors in our midst because suddenly they turn jazz. Or they turn blues, I've always liked blues, or I've always liked jazz, never did really like rock, but they made it on the back of rock and roll. No names mentioned. And I get really upset, because I think rock and roll is my art form, and I love it greatly. So my music's always been within that. See, rock and roll, funny enough, is not a tempo. To me, it's a musical culture. It spans, here we have singers like, there's a comedian here called Des O'Connor, who sings ballads, and he's done a few of the popular pop ballads and had a number of hits. If you could take that as being left field, and you take Led Zeppelin as being far right, they're two areas. I might dabble in the left, I'll never dabble in the right, but in between those is a great spectrum of tempos and feels and lyrics, and I've had a go at all of them, and I love it. That's what I call pop rock. It's not a bag of any sort. I don't want to. I mean, we all know about the Stones. They've been consistent. They're probably the most consistent band that's ever lived. They still make records that break the charts. It's wonderful, but they're unchanged. And that's their success, but that's not for me. I want to change every day. I'm the one that's written off here as bland and predictable, and I'm the only one that changes my style almost with every album.
Does it appears to, does it bother you when you don't feel you're accorded the kind of respect that some of these other, some of these other bands,
Yes.
they write about them as if they
Yes.
came out of another planet?
Yeah, I'm afraid it does now.
Yeah.
It does now, because it seems to me that what I've done is proven myself to the public. You don't survive 28 years without having something to offer. I know that we all of us survive on minority groups. Look, if I sell 1 million records here, which is really a tough thing to do, it just means that 59 million people did not buy it. So I'm very aware of my position in life. I think we're all we kind of overrate each other and ourselves. But I get upset when I'm written off as bland and predictable, and I've seen this a number of times. There's a great deal of snobism within our rock industry. We kind of look at other people, and because we don't sing the same tempo, or we don't sing the same protest song, oh, it's just Cliff Richard. Well, you can't do that. You just can't do that. I've proven myself. I've been singing 28 years, longer than any of them. All I've got to do is stay alive and have one hit a year, and they'll never catch me up. Never. I'm 5 years ahead of McCartney. You know what I mean? He'll never catch up unless I die. And what's more, I'm going to overtake Elvis. That's my ambition. Elvis has spent 17 years in our charts. And up to a few years ago, I had spent 15 years in the charts. Tim Rice compiled all the weeks that every artist ever spent in the charts and worked out how long it would be in years. Elvis had spent 17 years and a few months, and I had spent 15 years and 2 months. Now, that was about 5 years ago, or maybe more. All I've got to do is stay alive, and I will pass Elvis's record. So you can't just write people like me off. And I get upset because this year alone, I've made a record with a group called the Young Ones, who are alternative comedians, and we had a #1 hit record, which sold. It's the biggest selling record this year in Britain. My next major project was with an opera singer called Sarah Brightman, which is at the moment currently 3 in the charts.
Saw her last night.
I'm not predictable. People would like to write me off because I have always gone against the popular rock and roll image.
I wanted to ask you about that too. You're a man who has deep religious beliefs and talks about it too.
Oh yes.
How did you view the lifestyles of some of these people during these last 15, 18 years?
Well, it's always with a certain amount of disappointment, really, because I still feel, and Bob Geldof has once more proved what I've already known anyway, the power that is there within rock and roll. The power to communicate what you feel, the power to raise money, the power for propagation. It's wonderful what it can do. So it's always been a disappointment for me as a Christian to look at my fellow artists, some of whom I admire greatly artistically. Great singers, great musicians, great producers. But when you hear about their personal lifestyles, they seem to be on that rocky road of self-destruct, whether it be drugs or anything. Drugs, drink, whatever. And so therefore it's a disappointment, because here are adult people, rather than shouldering the responsibility that is life, they've allowed rock and roll fantasy to become their reality, and it's got to be destructive. That can only lead to destruction. I go on stage now, and funny enough, since feeling this way, since becoming a Christian some 20 years ago, in the last 10 years particularly, I've made a point of letting the public know that I'm aware of our fantasy. I mean, I've made references on stage to, when you hit a mirror ball with laser lights and you've got a bit of smoke, it is almost as though green crystal is there that you can touch. But to break it and say, you see what it really looks like without a light on, and you show them this little pulpy ball that is nothing unless it's hit in the dark. And I think it's important to do that. So I've never lived in that fantasy. When I come off stage, I say to them, look, wrinkles, the hair doesn't shine, but when I'm on stage, I don't want to see my wrinkles, and I want my hair to shine. So you light it. You make your fantasy for them to live in for a little while, but when they go home, it's reality. And for us, we've got to get out of that crystal beam. We have to leave those laser lights alone. They're not with us during life. And unless you're prepared to face the mirror and say, you're just another bloke. Okay, you can sing. It doesn't mean that someone else can't sing. You're just fortunate enough that a mass of people like the noise you make and buy your records. But when you look in the mirror, you have to realize that you're just another guy.
Have you felt that you've had respect from other musical people here?
Only in recent years. In the early years, I didn't care.
Yeah.
Because we were pioneers. The first 5 years, it didn't matter. The next 10 years was a difficult time, because when the then avant-garde bands came in with the Beatles and Stones, because we were by then establishment. 5 years was the lifestyle of a pop singer. When we got to 15 years, we were definitely establishment. Sorry, what was your question?
The respect from
Oh, yes.
fellow musicians and so forth.
We were not respected at all for ages, and it was almost, and even still, I'm still trying to live it down. Even friends of mine will say that they often, they've been guilty of going into a record store, looking over their shoulders and saying, "Have you got the latest Cliff Richard record?"
Kidding.
Still.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, it's because, well, again, if you happen to be a hip young guy, and you like listening to rock and roll, but Cliff Richard's recording with Sarah Brightman, who's an opera singer, I don't know why they should feel that should change me. If I happen to be able to sing rock and roll and be able to use my voice with an opera singer, that's just credit for me, that's all. I mean, why they feel that, I don't know, but I'm still trying to break that down.
Well, who's the audience that buys all these records then?
Well, you see, the biggest hits, you don't make a record to appeal to a group, because what you do is become a cult. Now, I don't want to be a cult. I want to be a hit record. I want to sell millions of records. And the big market is when you cross over. The big market is when you convince a whole group of pop fans, plus a whole group of people who wouldn't dream of entering the portals of a store. And once you capture that, you've got your big hits. I'll always be, I guess, as long as I make pop rock records and use the hair on my hand stands up when I like a song, and if I like it, I record it, and guaranteed there'll be a number of people, enough people to give me a top 30 hit to buy that record. So I guess my career could go as long as my throat lasts. But the big hits come when you convince Uncle that this is really good, and in the meantime you haven't put his niece or nephew off.
Do you write much?
No, I write a little bit, but I don't have time for writing.
What a great sense of songs you have. Where do the songs come from? Who picks them for you?
Anyway, I mean, there's loads of people that write that can't sing, or else who can sing but don't have commercial
But are
voices.
you out there digging, or somebody
Oh
else?
yeah, I dig as well as everyone else. But you see, where it's again become lucky, the 5 years before the Beatles was the best thing that happened to me, because I was established. I made hit records. My albums always sold, and writers knew that. So if they want to be sure of getting on a hit album, they'd send me songs. So I'd pick and choose and pick the ones I like best. I now have good friends who write. Terry Britton, who produces, I think he's number 2 in the States at the moment with Tina Turner. Alan Tarney. So, I have people that will write for me because none of them have got ambitions for themselves. Or if they have tried to record, it hasn't worked for them. Commercially, it just doesn't fit. And yet, with Alan Tarney and Terry Britton, I can sing any of their songs. It's almost as though they write for me. It's almost as though my skin just wraps around it.
How much input do you have into what your records sound like, the arrangements?
A few years back, a great deal. Nowadays, I tend to choose people whose sounds I like. So although I might inject a feeling about a sound or a suggestion for a guitar solo, my reason for choosing them is because of what they'll give me. If I want to do something of my own, then I'll produce a record like I'm doing at the moment. I'm currently doing an album that will be mostly rock spell music, rock-orientated gospel music. Not gospel in terms of black spiritual, but rock and roll Christian lyrics. And if I want to do that, then I do the production myself. And then I inject everything.
Records like that, I mean, alongside regular pop records?
Yeah. Well, I had one big hit with one that no one realized was a gospel record, because I didn't call it one. It's called Now You See Me, Now You Don't. And it went platinum here.
You ever talk to Pat Boone?
Oh yeah, I met Pat a number of times. Oh yeah.
He's another guy who looked at the charts one day and found out that he had more chart records than the Beatles or something like that, or he had more weeks on the charts for
That's
a
right.
period of time.
It's amazing if you look at the statistics. People forget what everybody else was doing because the media was so big on the Beatles. They kind of forgot. I mean, I can remember when the Beatles were big. It must have been '65 when they'd made it in the States by '65, hadn't they? There was a poll taken, and I was sent this list. I don't know whether it's Billboard or Cashbox or something. And the Beatles were the biggest band in the record sellers in the world. And who's the biggest solo artist in the world? Me. Right along there. And I thought, and I don't sell a record in America. So that was just on the rest of the world. I mean, we all know that America sells 5 times what anybody else sells. I mean, it was just stunning. But no one would remember that. And in the same way with Pat Boone. These guys were doing things. And too often, though, you see, this is what I think is changing now. In the young days of rock and roll, it was for young men and women. When I was 18, my uncles did not like it. I am now an uncle. My nephews and nieces love rock and roll, and they look at me, and I'm loving it with them, because I can't change. My little taste is the same. Rock and roll will eventually outlive us all.
Of course, we grew up with it.
That's right, and we can't change. I can't suddenly become an opera fan or classic music fan. I can recognize what it is, but it doesn't turn me on.
Do you still have the same motivation?
Oh yeah, more so now because you can do so much more.
And how about having a hit record? Is it a little deja vu?
No, never. It's never this. It's never ever become just a thing that you just take for granted. It's always been, always, even now, with the number 3 hit record, it's just the most wonderful feeling. Always.
How about the voice? You take care of it?
Yeah, well, I take care of it in that, I mean, I don't abuse it. I mean, unfortunately, I've never abused my throat with alcohol or my body with drugs. And that must help a great deal. When I'm on tour particularly, I do a lot of warming up. I get on stage for half an hour before and just gently sing through before I actually do the gig. When I drive to the theatre, I put a cassette on, sing quietly, usually sing harmony, bottom harmony, so you just warm the voice up. And those kind of things must help.
How about live performances? Has that always been a kick for you?
Pinnacle for me. Records are easy. Record is fun. Because you go in, there's no audience. You do what you want. I can sound like a 40-piece choir by multi-tracking. It's just magical and it's fun. But it's only the beginning of the creativity. That's where it starts with the records. But once you start getting on stage, to convince the crowd that what they're listening to is a 40-piece choir, that's something else. There's a certain amount of technical tricks you can use, but to actually take them away so that they actually accept it and come backstage and say, hey, it sounded like the record, we thought you were miming. I mean, I think that's the pinnacle for me, doing it live.
Is there anybody you know that's had this kind of longevity in the parts of the world where you do have hits?
Well, there's a lot of people that have been going a long time. I mean, if we talked about the Stones and Elton John and people, it's just that I started before them.
Yeah.
Yes, that's all. I've no doubt that Elton will be going. He'll have a 28th year celebration, I'm sure of it, as I've just had. I mean, I just don't have any doubts of it. And there are certain other people who I think could have longevity, but again, only time will tell. George Michael, I think, is a real talent, a really good singer, good-looking guy, writes good music. What more can you ask? It's going to be up to him whether he stays or not. Right? He's got it all. It's whether or not in his head he wants it to stay. Because sometimes you put in the self-destruct. You press the self-destruct button because you don't want to do it anymore.
Well, obviously there's some things now that didn't exist for you back 15 years ago. The money is so enormous, the business and the machine that at a certain point you say, why am I doing this? Maybe I want to do something else. It's hard to understand.
But there's so much to do. I mean, look at me now. I'm now involved in my first ever West End musical, and it's been a huge success, and it's so important looking. I mean, any rock star would give anything to travel this on the road. It's the most wonderful staging and lights. And it's given me a new dimension, because not only am I singing, but I'm having to be dramatic and act with some very fine actors, and it's a great challenge, and I love it. It's fabulous. It's just, I mean, I get here usually around about 6, in fact, which is an hour and a half before the show, but nobody else arrives till about 5 to 7. To me it's just constant injections. I feel up on it all the time.
Did you ever feel you wanted a full-time movie career? You did several films.
Well, it appealed to me at one point, but then it was obvious that the kind of films I was being offered were all the same. And like a good little artist, I decided I wouldn't do any unless there was something that really appealed. And there's been nothing offered to me that was of any appeal whatsoever in years. I'd rather make a good album than a bad film. And if people were prepared to take me seriously enough, I think I can act. I don't think I'm Sir Laurence Olivier, but then nobody else is either. So given the opportunity and a bit of work and a bit of direction, I think I could make it in a movie, but I don't necessarily have to star in it. I don't know whether people think sometimes because you've become a household name, they think, oh, well, we don't want to offer Cliff Richard the lead in The Missionaries or whatever, but I wouldn't mind to go at a small role. I mean, I realise my lack of experience, and I'll never gain any more unless I'm offered something. That's why this stage thing was a good thing to take, because it's rejuvenated me in terms of acting. I'd had a taste of it years ago, but then decided that my music was more important and concentrated on that. But now, having had a taste again, I think to myself, yeah, I'd love another go at something on stage. But perhaps I should do another musical first.
Have there been a few high points for you that you remember with great relish?
Yes, I mean, I remember my first gold disc, which was Living Doll, way back in '59.
And that made it in the States, too.
Yes, that was just broke, I think, 28 or something like that.
I was a disc jockey even playing it.
Really? Yeah. So it was a big, and to sell 1 million here, you see, what you have to remember is that you must multiply it by 5 to gather the same kind of feel in the States. I mean, 1 million selling, because you have 5 times the population, don't you? Right. So 1 million here is like 5 million in the States. So it was a great kick, to get my first gold disc. And in those days, you didn't get a gold disc unless you actually sold 1 million. Now people are beginning to realise that I think we get a gold disc now for 500,000 sales.
Anybody you've admired over the years you thought was...
Oh yeah, well, Elvis is the reason why I'm singing. Elvis, I thought, was the best. He was the prototype. I don't suppose there'll ever be anybody like him, really.
You ever meet him when he was there?
No, I didn't meet him. He never really came. If he did, he came in secret.
Yeah.
There were all sorts of rumours flying around that he would come, but he never did. But I had a chance to meet him in the States, but he was not well. And he'd put on a lot of weight, and I decided, look, my memory is intact of Elvis. The Elvis that I remember was Heartbreak Hotel and, All Shook Up and all those kind of songs, and classic hit after classic hit. I was not interested in Elvis's music from, is it Chapel of Love?
Yeah.
From then onwards, he lost me.
Chapel.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
What you say...
Or was it Crying in the Chapel?
Crying,
did he do
saw me crying in the chapel?
Yeah. From then onwards, it lost me. Not that I don't like those kind of songs. It's just that somehow or another Elvis began to sound like a cabaret singer, and he was never that. This was the animal that changed the world.
The thing that you represented here in terms of crossover and people. We've had a number of artists in the States, John Denver and Kenny Rogers, and mostly men, and Andy Williams and Neil Diamond. We've always known in the record business that those are extraordinarily valuable artists. And while the rock press and the Rolling Stone would tear them up and call them whatever the adjectives were at the moment, I think those who made decisions in record companies always really knew that
that's right.
to catch one like Cliff Richard.
It's I suppose you've quoted people who are more country orientated than I am.
Maybe
but
not Neil Diamond. I don't know.
Well, even Neil Diamond, you see, and again, maybe one of my problems in the States is that I'm not easy to categorize. Yeah. All I know is that Devil Woman got played on FM stations. When I did an album called I'm Nearly Famous, which was released with We Don't Talk Anymore on it, there were tracks on there, and I was getting this feedback from New York saying that people thought I was new wave. And of course, I can understand that maybe that is confusing, but for me, that's how I want to be. I'd like to find my albums in every rack that there is. Because I don't want to be an artist that sings one type of music. That'll be boring. And I can sing other things, so why not do it? And maybe that's been a problem. I mean, as I think about it now, maybe there's been an identity crisis. But if it's going to cost me my artistic integrity, then I'd rather not do it. I'd rather remain unknown in America and still make records that I think are really good. And when you consider Miss Unites, there's a wide gulf between Miss Unites and Devil Woman. They would have to be played in America on different radio stations. And I don't see why. I don't like that what do they call it, format radio?
Well, we categorize.
Mind you,
break it down.
yeah, you've probably got more radio stations and are able, therefore, to cope with it. I mean, in other words, if I'm sitting at home and I want to listen to Miss Unites, I can turn to the station that plays that. But I don't know about you, as a listener, I like to hear a cross-section of music. I don't want to hear all rock and roll, or all ballads, or all country and western. To me, a station that really catches my ear, that plays the best of all of it. Because particularly if you think of rock and roll as a musical culture, life is not about laughing all the time, or crying all the time. It's about crying and laughing. It's all mixed up. So in music, we ought not to sort of break it down and put ourselves in bags as much as we do. Which is in America, I think if there's a fault in American approach to music, it's that.
Well, we do pigeonhole things, and we have taken radio and so narrow casted it.
That's right.
That a record, we've always faced that problem with it's not FM. They
Yes,
there's a snobbery content there that you can't cross and do that. Cliff, if there was a year or a couple of years in this whole Cliff Richard career that you could put in a bottle and put up on a shelf for a while, and at age 75, 85, pull down and look at it and say, boy, that was the best ever.
Well, there'd be a couple of, I'd have to pick a couple of years, really. Obviously, my first year was so exciting, to be taken straight almost from school and thrown into this whirlwind life of traveling and, suddenly eating well and meeting famous people and royalty. It was just unbelievable. So 58, 59, because I began, my first record was released in September of 58. So September 58 through the year of that, 59 was a wonderful, wonderful year. Again, that incorporates the getting of the Gold Disc for Living Doll. I would say that I would then, if you only allowed me to say 2 years, I'd pick that first year, but the second one would be 1979.
Why?
Well, because again, I love poking people in the eye, artistically speaking. And just when everyone's thinking, oh, you know, here he is, I had a number one that's my biggest seller ever. Sold 5 million plus with We Don't Talk Anymore. And I loved it. I thought to myself, here I am, I've waited till I was 39, and I've had my biggest record. Just when everybody had said, oh yeah, well, you remember Cliff Richard, he's the one that sang Living Doll, and they used to go through my top, you know, the number one hits. And it's almost as though I was becoming a memory when suddenly, there I was, and it was number one. I said, look, you can't forget about me that easily.
Love it,
Yeah, so I would pick 79 as a very special time.
Have you gotten a little more thick-skinned about the press, or is the press a little kinder now?
No, I don't think the press gets any kinder. They have moments when they'll accept you, and even better when they ignore you. But most of the time, I don't know what it is, but they're pretty vicious in this country. I think they're less vicious in America, although in general I have found the media around the world to be pretty well of the same family. They don't mind when you're new, but once you make it, there seems to be this inbuilt thing of bringing people down, almost as though, you know, it would be different if in fact you snubbed them. I mean, I talk to anybody. I mean, I must have given more interviews than any other artist in the world. Ridiculous. I talk to them all. And they all have this weird way of writing up things that I say and trying to make me look stupid, and sometimes they succeed, I'm afraid. But then I go on television and do a talk show, and it puts a backlog of, you know, misconceptions correct. So you never really get thick-skinned enough, though. You know, it still hurts, because, you know, when you think about it, artists are vulnerable people. We're presenting something that is part of us, and we're opening it up, and we're exposing it. And you want desperately to be loved, not only for yourself, but for what you're doing. And when people say, rubbish, it really hurts.
Thank you.